like to welcome everybody this morning. And if you're visiting with us, there is a QR code on the back of the pew in front of you. If you could do that and fill out a visitor card, we would appreciate it so we can get back with you. It was a rough night for a lot of people across the country, so keep them in your prayers. Becky was telling me there's at least 2 church buildings that were hit in the tornadoes last night, both in Arkansas.
They got it Friday night.
Friday night? Okay. So lots of people that are struggling right now, and the day's not over yet. So lots of tornado warnings out today as well. So as the storm makes its way across the country. Oh yeah, these were serious tornadoes. I think I heard last night there were 29 tornadoes that came through a swath there. Yeah, and it's gonna be bad. So just keep those people in your prayers and in your thoughts. What's that? Yes, and our youth group is traveling there too. So so keep them in your prayers as well. So yeah, it's going to be serious. So keep in touch with the people you know that are in that swath. It seemed like it was every town where we used to live we were seeing on the news. So it was making the rounds. So all right, so let's talk about giants. I know that's an unusual topic for a Bible class. So are giants real? Real-ish, or okay. So if you're old like me, the very first giant that you probably ever knew was this guy. I can tell all the people that are old like me because you just laughed. Because if you weren't, you'd be saying, "What is that?" He might still make a commercial appearance every now and then, but that's the Jolly Green Giant. So if you were rating on the fictional to real scale, I think he would probably tend toward the fictional that you can see. If you are not quite as old as that, you may remember this giant. So who is he? Andre the Giant. Okay. So he was a little more real. He died in 1994. So how tall was he? Any thoughts? All of you are correct. There are all kinds of different numbers floating out there on the internet. When he died, he was said to be 6'10", but in his prime, he was said to be 7'4". But he did have some back problems that did tend to take away some of his height toward the end. But yeah, that's one of the giants that we know of. So you've got a real and a fictional giant here. Okay, so what about today? Who's the tallest person in the world? Anybody know? It's this guy. Let me get his name right. Sultan Kosin from Turkey is 8'3" tall. And he's pictured there by the world's shortest person at 1 feet 9.5 inches. So it kind of helps him be the shortest because it doesn't appear he has any legs. So that does tend to reduce your height somewhat, I guess. What about the all-time tallest guy in the Guinness Book of World Records? I used to always look through these books when I was growing up, and it was always entertaining and everything. But yeah, stumbled across this guy. His name is Robert Wadlow, and he was 8 feet 11.1 inches. So he would look way down at all the basketball players today. So, and that was when he was last measured on 27th of June, 1940. That was his height. And he had a condition, a medical condition, that caused him to continuously grow through his entire lifetime. So he never stopped growing. But it creates all kinds of physical problems for you whenever that's the case. Okay, so those are what we think of as modern day giants. What about in Bible times? What giants do you know of? Okay, we all know about Goliath. We hear the story there. So, how tall was Goliath? The Bible tells us. See who remembers. 9 feet 6. You're in the ballpark there. The Hebrew text said that he was 6 cubits and 1 span. So now you all know how tall he was. 6 cubits and 1 span. Yeah, so in real people language, with a cubit being about 18 inches and a span being 9 inches, that's 9 feet 9 inches. So, pretty big. So, even taller than Robert Wadlow. So, he was definitely an intimidating figure there. Okay, so, but the question is, was he just kind of like a one-off mutant or anything? Or, what's that? Okay, all right. There were some groups, in fact, several groups of people mentioned in the Bible that were considered giants at the time. What's that? There you go. Yep, we're going to get to all of that. They were called, the first group was Rephaims. They were an ancient race of giants, and if this works, it does not. Nope, it does not. But in the upper right corner, if you see Ashtaroth, that's where that original group of the Rephaim were from. And so it was east of the Jordan River, and that was mentioned in Deuteronomy 2:10 through 11. They were mentioned there. People don't necessarily agree exactly on their size, but the people of Canaan and the Israelites definitely were afraid of this group of people. So anyway, let's talk about them a little bit. The word Rephaim is derived from the Hebrew word Rapha, which means lofty or terrible one. So that seems like a very apt description of these people. The first mention of the Rephaim in the Bible is Genesis 14. Moses writes that in the 14th year, there is a name I'm going to butcher if I try to say it. And the kings that were with him came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzim and Ham and the Emim in Shavakar something. So I don't want to pronounce that so incorrectly that you take it as gospel. But some of these races included some very large people. Now this was probably a genetic deformity of some type, but it created a race of people that were considered giants at the time. They said that they were very tall, very strong individuals, and they existed up through the time of David, and in that period of time. So they were there for a long time. If you look on the left side of the map, that it appeared that some of that group migrated down to the lower left side of the screen. See where it says Anakim confined here, and up above that you'll see Land of the Giants up there. So that's not just a TV show. That was actually where they were. Okay, so we don't know how big they were, but they weren't this big. That I can say. It was probably an interbred community. So it was not a huge race of people, and since they tended to inbreed, that probably created a lot of physical difficulties. Yes, Calvin?
In Genesis, they talk about the giants being offspring of the sons of God intermarrying with men. Intermarrying with women.
Yeah, that leads us down a real long rabbit hole that I don't think I have time to go into today as far as who these sons of God were. I know if you get on YouTube and start looking at them, you're going to find that these were like fallen angels out of heaven, according to YouTube people and everything. The more likely term that I've heard is that these were God-fearing people, as opposed to the ones that followed Cain that were not God-fearing people, and that's why they were called sons of God. But they gave birth, it said, to the Nephilim. Now that was before the flood, as I recall, and so, but it's possible that some of those genetic traits were dormant in Noah and his family, and that race once again popped up to become the ones that we're talking about today. So I don't know if you had any more information than that, Calvin, but that's
It's just interesting that intermarriage produced giants, so there had to be some reason.
right. It was, and I'll let David sometime go into do a deep dive if he wants to on that subject. But I know he has spoken before on it, that this probably wasn't fallen angels and things like this. But a casual reading of the text would make it sound that way, definitely. All right, so in Deuteronomy 3, we learned about this guy, King Og. We don't know a whole lot about him, but he was from the remnants of the Rephaim. And Moses said his bedstead was an iron bedstead. It is in Rabbah of the sons of Ammon. Its length was 9 cubits and its width 4 cubits. So in people terms, that's 13 and a half feet by 6 feet. So he had a bed that was 13 and a half feet long. So that doesn't necessarily indicate exactly how tall he was, but he was a big guy that needed a big bed. And that's what we can glean from that. If he had that size of a bed, I don't know that he looked like the pictures. Those are not actual photographs. It may surprise you to know. But that's what somebody pictures that he might look like. All right, so here's kind of a representation of the various people. An average guy over there on the left side to Og and Goliath there. And then in Amos, let me get this right, Amos 2:8, I think that says, Amos 2:9, that's what it is. He describes giants as tall as cedars. Now, a cedar is not an exact unit of measurement or anything. I guess a cedar could be any height that it happens to be at the time. Probably not like 36 feet high like that guy on the right side, but they were big people. And as somebody mentioned, I can't remember if it was Calvin or who, you remember the 12 spies. You remember 10 were bad and 2 were good. I'm not going to do the song, but you can come back to VBS this year if you want to, and you'll probably get a chance to sing that song anyway. But those 10 spies that came back, they reported a people great and tall were already living there. They believed them to be sons of the Anakim from Deuteronomy 9:2. And they said they felt like grasshoppers next to these people. So these were some big people. There were about 4 different groups of tall people mentioned in the Bible here. Were they all related? I would say at least genetically they were related. Whether they were physically related or not, I don't know, but they at least carried the same genetic makeup, it appears, that turned them into large people today. Okay, so then let's get to the story that we really know and love, and that is Goliath. So there were a couple of different times whenever Philistines attacked, and we do have the famous incident of David facing Goliath there. But after David killed Goliath, there were several other cases, including the brothers of Goliath that were up here, where the Israelites met and defeated these giants. Sometimes it appears all it takes is one person proving you can do something, and then suddenly lots of people do it. But if you've got this mental block that these people cannot be defeated, then if you go in with that mindset, that's the way it's going to be. You're going to lose if you go in thinking you're going to lose. So, but it seemed like, oh, well, if David can take this guy down, you know, the same God is on our side that was on David's side. So apparently we can take these giants down. And David's mighty men did exactly that. Ended up taking down the last of these giants. And so after that, they were not a major threat anywhere in Israel. And it appears there's no remnant of them today unless Andre the Giant got a little bit of some of those genes. All right, so all very interesting, but how is that relevant? Since aside from Andre the Giant, we don't see a lot of giant people walking around today. The ones we do tend to just merely be tall, but not looking like a menacing warrior or anything. So, what kind of giants do you face today? Because we still have some giants that we face. Becky?
Mental and emotional.
Okay, mental and emotional giants. Calvin, did you have your name up? Your name up, your hand up? Sorry. I don't know. I should have slept longer.
I was thinking, like, if you took sin as a whole, that's a giant. Overcoming sin.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, sin is one of the giants that we face. And that's kind of a broad term, but there are lots of things that we struggle with in our physical lives and in our spiritual lives. There are a lot of things that we struggle with. And we have some strategies that we use to deal with these. On some of the things, you know, our stress and our doubts and our worries and everything, sometimes we just have to become more organized, especially if ADHD is one of your giants that you're facing, then you develop strategies to be able to cope with that. Sometimes you gotta manage your time and balance your responsibilities that you've got, but you've got ways to cope with this. You can spend more time in prayer, more time studying the Word and meditating on the Word, and those strategies are helpful. There are equally some strategies that are less helpful or not helpful at all, like isolating yourself and alcohol and drugs and self-harm. Some of these are coping mechanisms, but they're not helpful ones. They just add to the struggle. Okay, thoughts so far? Yes?
You mentioned ADHD. There's some recent research that shows that we actually created it. If you go back, you know, people that are our age, go back 50 years, ADHD was a fraction of what it is today.
And people will debate, you know, there is definitely an upsurge in people that are ADHD, and it might be a result of environment. It could be dietary changes. It could just be that people our age were just considered hyperactive, and we knew some of those kids too, so it just wasn't a thing to be diagnosed back in the old days, but I'm sure it existed. But point is, if you face that kind of a difficulty, you have to find a way to overcome it. And different people use different methods. My wife had to develop some study techniques because that was something she never did in high school. And so when she got in college, it became a challenge. And she had to learn the things that a lot of people learn earlier in life on how to do it. Okay, just like we've got personal struggles though, we also have spiritual struggles, and not just as individuals, but we have them as a church. We face many, many struggles. Some are new and some are old in life today, but we all face our giants individually and as a group. Any thoughts on things that the church itself as a whole are facing today? that may be something a little bit different than previous generations had. Any thoughts on that?
Lack of togetherness.
Okay, a lack of unity, togetherness.
Everybody's so busy and so scattered and so stuck on their phones, and you don't have the family sense that we did when I was growing up. We always had time all throughout the week with members of the church, not just at Sunday at worship.
Yeah, we do have that struggle of the digital world that we live in, and we do walk around with our head glued to our phone to the point where people get hit in traffic sometimes. Yes?
And in our society today, we've normalized so many things where people don't feel like the spiritual gifts that we believe in are not necessary in order to be saved or whatever. So it's really watered out a lot of what spirituality is.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem like a lot of our beliefs are kind of discounted. I heard something the other day, you used the word normalize. Whenever people talk about normalizing something, what that means is it's not normal. So if you're having to struggle to make it seem normal, then it's not normal. So I thought that was very profound. Yes, ma'am?
I also think that there's just a lack of God, purity of God amongst people today, because back in the day, on Sunday morning, people were going to church. Wherever church they went to, they were going to church. Nowadays, people they just miss, God and coming together to worship all together.
It's not a priority for people anymore. And sometimes they've just never had the opportunity to try it out. If your parents didn't bring you up going to church, then you're kind of an outsider in that environment. And it's always a mental struggle to overcome that challenge of, I don't know, I've never been to a church before. I don't know how. Are they going to yell at me and call me a sinner and make me sit in the back and put a scarlet letter on me? And you just don't know is the point. And we're anxious about things we don't know. Yes, Willie?
I say lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge. That was actually the first thing on my list. And the disembodied tendencies you talked about was the second thing on my list. And that's probably not coincidental. 82% of Americans thinks that it's in the Bible that God helps those who helps themselves. That they think that's a Bible verse. 12% think Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. And 50% of graduating high school students think Sodom and Gomorrah were husband and wife. We laugh, but there is a huge amount of biblical illiteracy out there today. Yes, Calvin?
Okay, I'm gonna try to take y'all back. Go back to 1960.
I can't, I wasn't born.
Sorry.
Which really says something about how old you are if I wasn't born. Anyway, go ahead, Calvin.
All right. This was talked about a lot. I remember it in the 1960s where the church people believed that Satan was targeting the youth. If you get the youth, you get the future of tomorrow. And I literally watched this happen generation after generation after generation, now some 40, 50 years. And each generation got weaker because Satan targeted the youth of our society. The other thing he targeted was family. Destroy the family, you destroy the church.
That's right. And those attacks on the youth definitely take their toll. There's no question about it. A lot of times we would see as we were growing up by more secular people that this was communism was trying to do this. But I think we see it for what it really is, and that's Satan. That's his goal. David always says we're one generation away from extinction as Christianity.
Gunn just pointed out that we're going to lose at least 50% of our youth.
Yeah, I've heard varying reports about how many of our youth stay faithful, but it's 50% or less stay faithful. I've heard as low as 30% actually stay faithful, and that probably includes the ones that are not faithful and come back eventually. So it's a low percentage.
Multiply that time generation after generation after generation, and see how we got here.
Right, and it's a struggle for parents, but it's also a struggle for the church as a whole to try to retain that talent and that enthusiasm that we have amongst our youth that stay. But not everybody does that. Okay, other thoughts? What other giants do we face today?
Society views.
I'm sorry?
Society views.
Society views. Can you expound on that a little bit? You mean how society views sin, or?
Views the church too.
Okay.
It's viewed more as a crutch for people as opposed to the family of God. And it's like, I was here when we got taken to court by the neighborhood trying to boot the church out of the neighborhood, saying it wasn't compatible with residential use. And we had to go through this whole hearing and everything downtown to get it ruled that churches were historically part of residential areas, and that we could, because there was a possibility we were going to have to move them, and not of our own choice. So it's, the church has been in a battle with society for quite a while now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's getting worse.
Yep, if you couldn't hear her on the live stream, she said that we're battling with the world, the way the world views churches in general. If you come to church, sometimes you're seen as weak, as you need a crutch, whereas really we just need to socialize with other Christians. And if you think about it, almost every group does that. There are groups for just about anything that you want to think of. You got groups for people that are smart. You got groups for people that like to go and watch birds. I'm not sure why. You know, for anything you want to do, you got the polar bear club that likes to go jump in ice cold water, which is even more astounding to me than watching birds. But whatever you've got, there's a group for it, and I think sometimes church is just viewed as one of those groups. Well, you know, if you're a weird Christian, then you go to church and you meet other like-minded, weak-minded people. But that is something that we struggle with, is just how we're viewed by the world today. And part of that I think we saw during COVID, where it was seen as a non-essential gathering. And so there were temporary restrictions on being able to meet together. Yes, Willie? Did you raise your hand? Oh, you're just directing songs? Okay. All right. Okay. I had compartmentalization. Sometimes we put our church lives over here in this box and our daily lives over here in this box. And it's like, okay, church is something we do on Sunday and being a Christian, and then the rest of the week we go over here and we live in this compartment. Sometimes we don't let those blend together nearly enough. We don't have our Christian life blend as we go out and we interact with other people, and that's where our mission is. Our meeting together on Sunday is just to rebuild us to go out into the world again. But if we compartmentalize those two areas of our lives, it creates a struggle for the church and for us. Okay? Other thoughts, other challenges? I had boredom as one. If we tend to do the same things over and over and over, people tend to get bored. So because of that, because we have such short attention spans today, many people come up with gimmicks and trends and things like that to try to make church more interesting. So you end up with choirs and dance teams and all sorts of things, whole theatrical productions, and it's not that those things are sinful or anything, but they don't always lead to the type of spirituality that a Christian needs. It tends to become entertainment rather than worship whenever we rely on those things. Yes, Calvin?
Psalm 1:1-3, Psalms before the nation. Meditate on God's word day and night. You study God's word like you're supposed to, you won't be bored. Especially studies like the book of Judges,
Mm-hmm.
Proverbs. You can't get bored if you're studying the word like you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
If you get bored, you're not reading the Bible.
That's true. But whenever you're a young kid and you come to church and you're made to sit there quietly and things like that, kids tend to get bored and their minds wander. And as adults, sometimes the mind wanders.
Involve them in the worship. Have them sing, have them read the Bible.
Absolutely. And that's the challenge that we face, is if we don't recognize these things as problems, we don't think about ways to fix them and to keep them going. And so instead, we just keep losing our generations one person at a time.
Just having them sit there and let them play and, don't pay attention. That's not how you raise a child.
Mm-hmm.
I hope our older ladies are teaching our younger ladies, and older men are teaching our younger men how to raise children. Because that's where we're losing.
Yep. And it's not just children, as we said, it's adults. Sometimes David will say something and it will spark something in your mind, and so then you go to a different verse and you're not paying attention anymore and you're reading about something else, and then that links to something else in your mind that's not even biblical, and you're thinking about that and where you're going to go eat lunch, and before you know it, Satan has completely distracted you, and David finishes and you're like, what did he say? I missed all of that after that provocative statement that he asked at the beginning. And that's the way Satan works. I don't know if any of you have read the Screw Tape Letters, but it's a fascinating work that, in fact, they just did a theater production of it at the Dr. Phillips Center not long ago, and it was fantastic. But it just kind of shows the inner workings of how Satan operates, how he gets into our minds, and how he undermines everything that we try to do. But yeah, if you haven't read that, I highly encourage it. It's by C.S. Lewis, and it's a fascinating insight into what happens in our minds. Okay, thoughts? Okay, I listed consumer Christians. We even go so far as to say we're going church shopping when you get to a new place. And so you go around and you visit and you're like, I don't like this church and I don't like this one. Ooh, this one suits me. And people do that. They go to church in order to get something. Well, I didn't get anything out of that worship. And we forget what the purpose of worship is when we do that. If you don't put anything into it, you're not going to get anything out of it. The whole point is it's worship to God. It's not about us. And sometimes we tend to forget that. We're like, ooh, this church is fun. Instead of this church is teaching the word. And this church has sincere Christians that attend it. Okay? So instead we end up with this checklist. Okay, this is what I'm looking for in a church. I want this, and it's got to have this, and if they don't serve coffee whenever I get here, that's the unpardonable sin. But sometimes what gets missed on that checklist is it biblically accurate, and are the people hypocrites, or are they sincere? And am I welcome here? So you're looking for whether the fruits of the Spirit exist in this church. Okay? Yes, Becky.
How seriously are we taking it?
How seriously are we taking church, Christianity, Both? Okay.
It's like, when I was growing up, every class had a workbook, and you were expected to have read the lesson and have your workbook completed before you got to class. And woe to those who did not. But now seems like, especially with the younger people, just having the littler ones, there's no continuity in what we know about what they're studying to be able to continue following up on that and continue to work with them on it. And
We went to
seems
one.
like we're spending the amount of time focusing on it that we did in other generations.
Yeah, there was a church that we attended in Montgomery, Alabama, where everybody from the nursery to the adult classes were studying the same thing
Yeah.
every week. Everything was synchronized. So whatever you studied in your Bible class, you knew you could go home and talk to your kids, and that they were studying the same thing. That has advantages and disadvantages. You know, sometimes the topics you've got to cover are a little different. But it was a way for you to connect with what your kids were telling you. Instead of asking them, what did you study about? I would ask my son, what'd y'all learn about in class? And he says, learn about God, learn about Jesus. And that was his stock answer. And we're like, your story was in the Old Testament. How much did you learn about Jesus today? It's like, he might have been there, but you wouldn't have been taught that in high school. I mean, in your grade school classes and everything. But yeah, you're right. How seriously do we take it? I mean, how seriously is this subject? It's not like your immortal soul depends on it, right? Oh, wait, it does.
It's the most important thing anybody has to learn.
Exactly. It's the most important thing anybody has to learn. And with that in mind, if it's that important to us, how important to us is it to share that with other people? There's a song, we seldom sing it anymore, but we did whenever I was growing up, called You Never Mentioned Him to Me. And the thought was, on Judgment Day, which of your friends and relatives and neighbors are going to say, you saw me every day and you never mentioned Jesus to me? Why not? And now I'm lost forever because you didn't tell me about him. Okay, thoughts? Yes, Willie.
I've heard a lot of people, when they come to the church and something, say, this preacher, you know, he might be he laid back, he's not one of the energetic preachers. They say they don't get nothing out of it because of the tone or the entertainment he put into it. So I say, well, did you come to get fed or listen at the preacher?
That's right.
I say, as long as he's preaching the word of God, he should be satisfied, regardless to the way he perform or what anything like that.
Yeah, that's true. If you're coming to get fed, it might not be the food that was your favorite food, but it was food nonetheless. And I will freely admit some teachers are more talented than others, and some preachers are more talented than others. When we went to my dad's church, we went in and the preacher one day said, okay, I've got these 27 points that we're going to cover today. And we're like, 27 points? And all he did was read them off a list and didn't expound on them or anything. And, you know, not our favorite preacher that we'd ever experienced. But there was information in there if we got past the presentation style that he had. So if a preacher is preaching from the Word, then there's something in there for you, and there's some food. Yes, Calvin?
You know, we have that scripture that says, how can you hear if you haven't been taught?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I take that a little deeper. How can you, like someone mentioned, we've lost reverence. We've lost reverence for God. How can you have reverence for someone
anything can be made to sound ridiculous if you try. But it kind of goes back to the world doesn't know their Bible, and they don't know what it says. All they know is what people have told them that it says. And if people told them accurately what it said, it's completely different than if people teach you or tell you in a mocking way. But so many people did not grow up going to church, as we mentioned, and so they don't know what it's all about.
We don't really believe Satan was a snake. He was called a serpent. But I think that's a metaphor for how he was and how he acted.
Mhm.
Satan was a fallen angel. He wasn't really a snake.
So yeah, there's lots of forms that people can take in the Bible and elsewhere, but yeah, it's the kind of thing that if we don't educate people about what the Bible is really about, then they're not going to know, and a lot of people are receptive once you get to talking to them about it. On Wednesday night, after we got a study we're finishing up, and then there's going to be a different one, and then we're going to do a study on personal work. And we're going to talk about techniques that you can use to lead conversations into the spiritual arena and to help people be receptive to what it is that you're talking about. It's based on Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, except we're going to take that and apply it to spirituality instead of salesmanship, even though they are somewhat related topics. Okay. All right. I had on my list the idol of autonomy. Do whatever feels right to you. Be whoever you want to be. And that's a mentality that a lot of people have. They don't like to be told what to do. They want to be free spirits, and they might pluck some things out of the Bible, some concepts that they like, and they may equally pluck some items out of Buddhism or Islam or whatever it is, but they like to just pluck out, okay, I like these things, and we call it being a cafeteria Christian sometime, where it's kind of like you go, yeah, I want this, but ooh, I don't want that. Let me have a double portion of this over here, the dessert, and sometimes we want to do that, and people want to do that with their spirituality and their Christianity. Yes?
I just want to take you back to 1960s again.
Oh, no.
Remember this song, It's Your Thing. Do what you want to do.
Okay. I can't say that I remember that song, but I probably heard it at the time. But in the multiple decades that have happened since then, I've probably lost it. But that encapsulates that feeling of do what you want to do. I was thinking more of the have it your way at Burger King, but you can whatever floats your boat on that.
Beginning of that philosophy.
It really was back in that time. People started to get the idea of, I can do what I want, I can be who I want, and if church doesn't have those things, I'll just design my own church. And sometimes that happens where, well, it could be, but lots of things going on back then. It was definitely a time of change and of challenging the norms of the older generations. Okay, I also had aversion to commitment. A lot of people struggle with commitment these days, don't want to commit to anything, a spouse or anything else that they look at. Sometimes they don't want to commit to a political party, and especially one that their parents subscribe to. And sometimes we just want to be different, and sometimes we want to keep our options open. And so people aren't always willing to commit in that sense. It's kind of like, okay, I went to this church a few times, and it was okay, but somebody said something I didn't like, and so I'm going to go somewhere else. And if I find one there that suits me perfectly and that nobody ever says anything that offends me, I might go there for a while, but probably not. But that's what we see. Did you say something? Floaters? Okay. I thought those were those little things in my eye that I see when I look at a white wall. But maybe it's that as well. Eye doctor said you just got to live with it. Nothing I can do. Okay. One thing that hasn't been mentioned here, at least not specifically, was social media. How do you think social media affects religion and spirituality today? Okay, destroying us. If you want to take it to that extreme, in a lot of ways, yes. And how do you see it destroying us? What are the effects that you see?
It allows us to hold that little 3x6 idol in our hands and worship it, actually. Without that, I cannot survive.
Mm-hmm. And it's a struggle. I mean, do you ever have that moment of panic? I left my phone at home. Whereas, back in the 80s, people would say, of course you left your phone at home. That's where it is. It's plugged into the wall. But suddenly it's an emergency when you don't have your phone. What if I need it? What if I want it? What if I get bored? What if I have to go for 2 minutes without some form of entertainment? And even worse than just merely having it is what we use it for sometimes. Yes, Randy? What's that? They're designed that way. Social media is designed to be addictive. And there is a lot of effort that has gone into making it addictive. So that yes, the immediate response of living for people liking and sharing your posts on social media, and people complimenting you on your latest picture, and it is designed to build up your ego and to make you feel like this is a world in which I am important, and I am valuable, and everybody is waiting with bated breath to see what's the next thing that I'm going to put on there, and you doing the same with them. But it is a struggle, and for one thing, it's just what we call a time suck. You've got 3 hours in the afternoon, and before you know it, you realize you've spent them all on your phone, on social media or playing games, and you've completely wasted an afternoon just doing these things. Okay. What about your other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Social media can be a good tool though for the church as far as I think there are people who, like if you stream, your church stream services,
Mm-hmm.
you share that, why not get people viewing that maybe wouldn't normally actually come to church with you, because they have that comfort of being at home and watching, and that might lead to curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
questions.
Yeah, there are positive aspects to social media and the internet that can be used. As you said, streaming worship services. I love the concept that when somebody says something and I think, oh, where's that verse? And I can pull up Bible Gateway and I can do a quick search or just a Google search, and it's like, oh yeah, here's the reference I was thinking of. And that's amazing. It has made preparing to teach the word so much easier with having an infinite amount of information at your fingertips. And it's so much faster to find the different verses that you're thinking of and all of these things. But it is a tool, and that's how we have to look at things. Tools can be good and tools can be bad. You can take a hammer and you can build a house for somebody, or you can take a hammer and you can murder somebody with it. But things are tools, and it's all in how we use them. Yes, sir.
Going back to what the brother said, that I remember back in the 60s, we had the tools back then that were called concordances.
Mm-hmm. I still have them. Never use them, but I still have them. Because it's so much faster to Google the verse that I want than, or the subject that I want, or just use the cyclopedic index in the front of my open Bible here. But yeah, I still have all those books, and you know, if we have an apocalypse or something, I will go back and use them again. But until then, like everybody else, I've become addicted to technology because it's so much faster. But those were invaluable tools when we were growing up, and you didn't have electronic access to every piece of information in the entire world. Yes?
I was just going to say, I think it's important to note that while the challenges that we face today might take a different form,
Mm-hmm.
they're no different than what Jesus had to be tempted by, or what, early in Genesis, before God destroyed the earth. Every thought and intent of man was to do evil. We just finished Judges,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenges we face are different, but it's not any more difficult today to follow God and do what is right in His eyes than it was in the first century or at any other time. Solomon said there was nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly Christ didn't have to deal with his iPhone, but I would imagine there were challenges presented to him that took the same base temptation that we face.
You had the false teachers then that were telling you things, just because you pull something up on the internet today, you can't automatically just trust it. You have to take what you hear and evaluate it based on your knowledge and what the scriptures say. And that's important that you do that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm old school, and I lived in the 60s, but we're trying to reach the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my grandson, let's get that Concord back. Just like you said, it's cool, and it can be bad, and it can be good.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to keep up with the younger generation because we're trying to teach them, the church needs to go on. I'm not gonna get my concordance out. I'm just not. I'm trying to teach younger children. I was a school teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't imagine, come on, Jameson, get your concordance out and look up this word. When you can just look it up, come on. I don't know. Anyway, that's how
I know. I still have lesson plans for teaching youth where it's, this is how you use a concordance and everything. But we do need to adapt our methods with the times. And we don't want to just surrender the internet to the enemy. We need to use it as the tool that it is. It can be bad and it can be good.
Just like TV can be bad.
Right.
The telegraph, I don't know telegraph people.
The telegraph? Really? How old are you? We do. We have to use good judgment. Okay. I'm sorry. Somebody had a question. Oh, there you go.
I think she made my point, but I just kind of wanted to bring it home with, just with the fact that because we have things that are new, technological advances, excuse me, it's still up to us to be wise. And so, one of my pet peeves, going back to what Calvin was saying with raising kids, and one of my pet peeves is going in a restaurant and seeing a family sitting down and everybody, the kids are all on their iPad playing games, the adults are all sitting there with their faces on the phones, and that's just kind of a sign of kind of where we've gotten to. But to me, it's like we can have things that are going to make our lives better and easier, but we have to be wise and say, okay, you know what, we're sitting down to dinner. I had to do it in my house, and my husband said I got later, but we had got to that point. I was like, okay, no phones at the table. Like when we sit down to eat, you need to put your phone down, or we need to talk to each other every now and then.
Yeah.
We get a little.
And it's not just the kids. Sometimes it's us too. Yeah.
It's the adults as well. So we may have tools that make our lives better, easier, faster, whatever. But anything can be used for bad for people and take us away from what we should be doing. So we've got to have the wisdom to say, okay, no kids, I'm gonna limit the time that you're able to watch television.
Right.
You can get news quickly. That's a great thing.
Mhm.
You can help people who play with their money, but you can also sit there and watch TV and watch drama for hours.
With new capabilities come new rules and everything. And I know my wife and I have sat down at the restaurant and pulled out our phones and everything. Sometimes we talk about the things that we're reading on there, but occasionally one of us will say, "Oh, my battery's dying." I guess we have to talk. but we do. Okay. Last thing that I had was distrust of authority. Sometimes people don't like to be told what to do, and that kind of goes along with the freedom that we talked about earlier. But sometimes people have an immediate distrust of whenever they're given any kind of a rule. Adam and Eve had one rule. You had one job, and that's all. You had one rule, and you broke it. And in the same way today, anytime there's a rule, somebody's going to break it, probably us. And that's just kind of the way that we look at it. We don't like being confined and being given restrictions. But I think sometimes we're looking at that the wrong way. A lot of the rules that God has given us are for our own good whenever we look at it. And we see what happens when people violate those rules, and we see the consequences that follow them. And sometimes we look at it and we're like, okay, yeah, I can see why that was a rule. From basic physical things like circumcising on the 8th day, because it takes 7 days before your blood starts to clot. And so that was a rule that was given for a good reason that people didn't know about then, but God did it to protect us. But other times it's very clear when we see about being faithful to our spouse, and we see the things that happen to people that violate that rule, then we're like, yeah, that actually does make sense. Okay, any closing thoughts before we wind up here?
Everything that God told us is for our benefit.
Everything is for our benefit.
If you go back to the Israelite dietary law, don't eat animals without hooves.
Mm-hmm.
That eliminated pork that had worms that could kill you.
Oh yeah.
Fish with no scales, again, parasites. We didn't know that scientifically back then,
Mm-hmm.
but God knew it.
But God did, because He's the one that created the science and to begin with. And
That's the scientific proof that the Bible agrees with, right there.
And yeah, we can look back in hindsight and see the reason for the rules. And similarly, if we look with an open mind at the rules and restrictions we've been given today, if we're honest with ourselves, we see why those rules are there too. Okay, just in closing, as we said, the word Rephaim is meant lofty or terrible one, when in referring to those literal giants that they had back then. But there is another way that word was used. It also meant the dead, shadows, spirits, or shades of the dead. And so it gradually got to where that term was used to mean weak and powerless, which is quite the turnaround. It could also be rendered extinct. So the giants that they had then were eventually made weak, powerless, and became extinct. In the same way, we've got our giants today that we need to face. And if we face them down and acknowledge their existence and tackle them, we can make them weak, powerless, and extinct as well. Let's close in a prayer. Our Father, we're so thankful to you that you've shared with us your incredible wisdom through the scriptures that we have. We're thankful that we're able to read them and learn from the things that people did well and the mistakes that they made. And we're thankful that you've given us the guidelines that you have to keep us safe and to keep us on the right path and to guide us in the hope that we have of eternal life with you. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Thank you for your attention this morning.